We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
Subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Make sure every alert is on, because what experts have revealed in the last 48 hours is more shocking than anyone expected. This is the question investigators are forced to confront in every high-profile, long-running missing person case. The question families plead journalists not to ask. The question nobody dared voice publicly, until now. Is Nancy Guthrie still alive? Not as speculation, not as provocation, but as a forensic reality that investigators, medical experts, and former FBI agents are now facing head-on. The answer will dictate every decision in this ongoing investigation. Here's what the past 48 hours have confirmed. The cadaver dogs remain on standby. Yas's sleep specialist warns Nancy was at immediate risk of a fatal heart attack the moment she was taken. The FBI command post has moved from Tucson to Phoenix. A signal sniffer was deployed in the desert, not to find a living victim, but, according to law enforcement sources, to locate a body. And Savannah Guthrie, in a moment of raw, devastating honesty, admitted her mother may already be gone. Tonight, we will do what every responsible journalist must. Ask the hardest question and take you step by step through what the evidence, experts, and medical science reveal. Let us begin where every honest conversation about this case must start. In the first several weeks, the investigation carried the urgency of a live rescue. Hundreds of FBI agents were deployed in the field. A 24-hour command post operated in Tucson. Cadaver dogs scoured the desert. Helicopters circled the Catalina foothills, Bluetooth signal detectors scanning for a ping from Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker. The energy of those early days was pure urgency. Relentless, desperate, racing against the clock measured in hours. Then everything shifted. The FBI withdrew most of its Tucson-based personnel. The command post moved from Tucson to Phoenix. The massive visible search presence that had defined the first weeks quietly contracted into a smaller, focused task force. When reporters questioned Sheriff Chris Nanos about the cadaver dogs, once highly visible but now absent, his answer was cautious. They are available if needed, available if required. That is not the language of someone expecting to deploy them to find a living person immediately. And then Nanos said one more thing that stunned the nation. When asked directly if Nancy Guthrie is still alive, Sheriff Chris Nanos said, "Anything is possible. Not, we believe she's alive. Not, our evidence strongly suggests she is alive. Anything is possible." This was from the sheriff who, just 2 weeks earlier, had publicly and without hesitation declared he believed Nancy was still out there. That statement was a seismic shift. Now, let us turn to CNN's chief law enforcement and intelligence analyst, John Miller. Miller is not a commentator. He is not a pundit giving television hot takes. He is a former official of the New York Police Department, a former director of intelligence and counterterrorism for the NYPD, and one of the most respected analytical voices in American law enforcement journalism. When Miller addressed Nancy Guthrie's fate in a one-month retrospective, he framed it with precision that demands attention. He said, "The question of Nancy Guthrie's fate is central because with a living victim, urgency drives everything, with life hanging in the balance pushing the pace. With a victim presumed likely dead, the investigation slows and becomes meticulous, allowing time-consuming investigative lines that are productive long-term." Read that carefully. Miller was not declaring Nancy dead. He was laying out the investigative logic that governs every decision being made right now. If Nancy Guthrie is alive and the pace is urgent, every resource is deployed in real time. If she is dead, the investigation slows, becomes methodical, patient, and forensically thorough, the kind of investigation that builds an airtight case able to survive prosecution. The current posture, shrinking from hundreds of agents to a focused task force, shifting from search to intelligence gathering, aligns with Miller's second scenario. That does not mean investigators have given up. It means they may have recalibrated. The most striking piece of public evidence came from Savannah Guthrie herself on social media, in a raw, deeply personal message to the nation. Savannah admitted something no child ever wants to voice about a missing parent. Her mother may already be gone. She added, "If she is in heaven with loved ones who have passed, then we will accept it." Yet the family still seeks answers. Process that sentence, A daughter publicly preparing for the possibility her mother is no longer alive. Not giving up hope, but acknowledging that hope alone may not be enough. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe explained what such a statement signals about the private conversations behind closed doors. He told CNN that the Guthrie family's public messaging throughout this case has been carefully shaped with the guidance of FBI crisis negotiators and hostage recovery experts. Every word in their statements, he said, was meticulously crafted with the assistance of FBI specialists. If Savannah Guthrie's acknowledgement of her mother's possible death was part of an FBI-guided message, it indicates investigators are preparing the family. And they do not normally do this unless their assessment of the situation has shifted. Now, let us turn to the medical experts, because the question of whether Nancy Guthrie could have survived what happened on February 1st is not just emotional, it is physiological. And the answers doctors and specialists have provided are deeply troubling. Sleep expert Pat Byrne spoke on Crime Stories with Nancy Grace. He addressed the scenario investigators believe occurred, Nancy Guthrie being violently awakened from sleep in the deep hours of the night, around 2 a.m., and forcibly removed from her home. He explained a process called sleep inertia. At 2 a.m., she was likely in a very deep sleep or in REM sleep. If in deep sleep, she would have been extremely disoriented. He continued, "That concerned me immediately. Research shows elderly people, even without heart conditions, put elderly people at extreme risk of heart attacks when violently woken from deep sleep." Then Byrne addressed the detail that matters most. Nancy Guthrie does not have a typical elderly heart. She has a pacemaker, a medical device implanted in her chest, because her heart cannot reliably maintain its own rhythm without assistance. Byrne explained that the combination of being violently awakened from deep sleep, the confusion from sleep inertia, and the physical trauma of a forced abduction, especially for an 84-year-old woman with a known cardiac condition, placed her at extremely high risk of a fatal cardiac event in the immediate moments after she was taken. Not later, not after weeks in captivity, but in the first minutes. Dr. Shrihariya Zeknaidu, a board-certified cardiologist and professor of medicine at New York Medical College, added a clinical perspective. He explained that pacemakers are fitted in elderly patients with bradycardia, an abnormally slow heart rate that cannot sustain itself without electronic stimulation. For a patient of Nancy's age, an abrupt physical shock carries serious cardiac consequences. The heart, already dependent on a device, is put under extreme stress. Adrenaline floods the body, blood pressure spikes. The heart races. In a healthy young person, this is manageable. The heart has the reserve to absorb the shock. In an 84-year-old pacemaker patient, that reserve does not exist in the same way. The cardiac risk is not theoretical, it is immediate. There is another piece of medical evidence from the scene that forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden addressed when asked about the blood found on Nancy Guthrie's front porch. Nancy's blood was confirmed by DNA analysis. The blood was not a smear or wound pattern. It appeared in drops with pale centers, a specific morphology Baden described as typical for blood originating from the nose or mouth because it mixes with air. Blood from the nose or mouth, not from a cut hand or scraped knee, from the face. Baden concluded the evidence was consistent with a blow to the face or a forward fall, the kind of impact that leaves drops on a hard surface. An 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker, violently awakened, possibly struck or fallen, bleeding from her face before she even left the property. Her essential medication was left behind. This fact has been highlighted in coverage as a detail that adds urgency to the search, but it deserves closer examination because, in terms of survival probability, it is one of the most critical pieces of information available. Nancy Guthrie requires daily medication for her heart condition. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed this explicitly, emphasizing that she needs it to survive. Her medication was left on her kitchen counter or in her medicine cabinet when investigators arrived. It did not go with her. How long can an 84-year-old pacemaker-dependent patient survive without her daily cardiac medication? Medical experts have refrained from publicly specifying a timeline because her exact regimen is unknown, but the clinical consensus for elderly patients on essential cardiac medications is grim. Missing even a single dose can destabilize the cardiac rhythm the medication maintains. Missing multiple doses over days or weeks in someone already under extreme physiological stress fundamentally changes the survival calculation, not from weeks to months, but from days to days. Then came the signal sniffer, a detail that pierced through the careful public language of the investigation and revealed what authorities were truly searching for. Ashley Banfield, reporting through Drop Dead Serious, cited law enforcement sources confirming that the Puma County Sheriff's Department engaged a partner agency was engaged to deploy a specialized detection system in the desert terrain of Santa Cruz County near Rio Rico, close to the area where the first detained person, quickly cleared, had been stopped. They used a signal sniffer, a device built to detect Bluetooth signals in the field. The official purpose was to search for Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker signal, but Ashley Banfield's sources were clear about what investigators actually hoped the signal would lead them to. Not a living victim in a structure or vehicle, but a body. They were searching for a body in the desert. This is not a rumor. This comes from named law enforcement sources speaking to a journalist with direct FBI contacts. Cadaver dogs had been used earlier, and now a signal sniffer was deployed in open desert terrain. The investigative posture, the technology chosen, the terrain targeted, and the language from sources all signal a recovery operation, not a rescue. But this must be framed carefully, because there is a counterargument, and it is not weak. Sheriff Chris Nanos has not declared Nancy Guthrie dead. He has not publicly shifted to homicide language. In one of his most emotionally direct interviews, when pressed by a Fox reporter about whether Nancy is still alive, he gave an answer that demands attention. He said, You have no proof, nobody does, that she's not alive. I'm going to have that faith. Sometimes hope is all we have. That statement carries weight, not because it comes from a man in denial, but because it comes from a law enforcement officer constrained in what he can say publicly, fully aware that the absence of a body equals the absence of proof. In the legal and investigative sense, Nancy Guthrie is missing, not deceased. Missing. That distinction matters for the investigation, the family, and the public. CNN's John Miller confirmed the investigation is nowhere near cold. He said it explicitly. This is not a cold case. Plenty of scientific evidence has yet to return. Investigators are still actively pursuing leads. If we discuss this a year and a half from now, Miller said, it might be considered a cold case, but right now, the situation remains opaque. Opaque. Not closed, not abandoned. Opaque. Then there is the precedent for kidnapped victims surviving. Elizabeth Smart was abducted from her Salt Lake City home at age 14 in June 2002. She was held captive for 9 months. She was found alive. Jessie Duggard was abducted in California at age 11 in 1991. She was held captive for 18 years. She was found alive. In both cases, the public had given up hope. In both cases, law enforcement had quietly shifted resources and assumptions. In both cases, they were wrong. Kidnapped victims can survive in captivity when there is a reason to keep them alive. And in the Nancy Guthrie case, a reason exists: the ransom notes. Multiple media outlets received communications demanding millions of dollars in Bitcoin. The notes included highly specific, inaccurate details about Nancy that could only have come from someone with direct knowledge, including a detail about the location of her Apple Watch that had not been public. If someone has Nancy Guthrie and genuinely intends to ransom her, then keeping her alive serves their purpose. A living hostage is leverage, a dead hostage is evidence. Former FBI hostage negotiator Rich Frannell explained it plainly. What investigators hope for is a response from the hostage taker, proof that they are still communicating, showing that there's still a transaction to be negotiated. The ransom notes have not been definitively authenticated, but neither have they been definitively dismissed as genuine. And as long as that ambiguity remains, so does the possibility that Nancy Guthrie is alive. The medical survival question also has a counterpoint worth noting. The pacemaker data went dark at 2:28 a.m., not because the pacemaker stopped, but because the Bluetooth connection between the device and Nancy's phone was severed by distance. The pacemaker itself is implanted. It does not need a phone connection to function. It does not need a phone connection to regulate Nancy's heartbeat. It continues its work whether or not it transmits to any monitoring app. If Nancy was moved from the home, even rapidly and under extreme stress, the pacemaker was still maintaining her cardiac rhythm. It was still working. Distance killed the signal, not the patient. The medication issue is more serious. But even cardiac patients missing doses do not necessarily experience immediate fatal events. The timeline for medical deterioration depends on drug dosage and individual physiology. The honest medical answer: no one outside her treating physicians knows how long she could survive. No expert outside her treating physicians does. So, what does the totality of expert opinion actually say? It says this: the probability of Nancy Guthrie being alive decreases with every passing day. At 6 weeks, with no proof of life, no ransom contact confirmed by the FBI, no medical resupply, and considering her specific physiological vulnerabilities, the experts who have spoken publicly are no longer using the language of rescue. IB Times UK summarized the forensic community's collective assessment plainly: hope is waning. But they did not say hope is gone. That distinction, the space between waning and gone, is where this investigation lives. Because the FBI is still working. Because the genetic genealogy analysis is still running. Because the mixed DNA from the crime scene has not yet been fully separated and profiled. Because the damaged utility box is still being examined. Because the January 11th surveillance sighting is still being cross-referenced with neighborhood footage. Because somewhere, in a server, on a doorbell, in a cell tower record, a piece of data exists that will answer the question every expert is now asking. What happened to Nancy Guthrie? Not just who took her, but what happened afterward. Clinical psychologist Emily Mellon at Tufts Medical Center spoke to News Nation about what families endure when a loved one is missing and no answers come. She said it is a horrifying experience to lose someone for any reason. But when that loved one is a missing person, there are countless open and unanswered questions. She described the unique torture of missing person uncertainty, the inability to grieve, the inability to heal, the inability to plan forward, because the unanswered question consumes everything. Savannah Guthrie described it herself from inside that reality. She told her colleagues in a moment so raw it transcended television. "I wanted you to know that I'm still standing. I still have hope. I'm still me. And I don't know what version of me that will be, but it will be. I don't know what version of me that will be." A daughter living inside the hardest question in this case. Not knowing. Still standing. Still hoping. The hardest question in the Nancy Guthrie case does not yet have an answer. Experts have laid out the physiology, former agents the investigative logic. The cadaver dogs have been pulled back. The signal sniffer has been deployed. The FBI command post has moved. And still, nobody has been found. No proof of death has emerged. No family member has been told to prepare for a funeral. The case remains active. The DNA is still being processed. The investigation is expanding its timeline backward and intensifying its forensic analysis. Until proof emerges, one way or the other, the only honest answer to the hardest question remains the one Sheriff Nanos gave. You have no proof she's not alive. Sometimes hope is all we have, and sometimes hope is enough. If you have any information at all regarding the Nancy Guthrie case, call 1-820-CLL-FBI immediately. A reward of $1.2 million is waiting for the tip that could bring Nancy home or finally provide her family with the answers they deserve. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell and turn on every alert, because when this case breaks, and it will break, you need to be here from the first moment to see it unfold.